Hi folks, this is another quick tutorial video. This one actually will be quick because I'm not going to reiterate the same shit I did in the previous video. So, a new version of the Virpil software has been released, which obviously contains the firmware that goes onto your devices. I currently have a V1 Virpil throttle and a Warbird base along with a CM1, the standard first version of their grip. So, generally what you have to do first is do the firmware upgrade procedure, which is covered in my 11th of April video, so you can go and check that out. It's not very hard to do. You update the firmware, not a single button press. You go to the profile tab, you create a new profile, you save it back to the device. You go through the calibration procedure for all your axes, save that back to the device, and then you're good to go. So I've already gone through all that in this new edition of the firmware because this is dated the 14th of May 2019. And I'm just going to show you some of the new features. First off, you go to Profile tab. Oh, by the way, this button here, if I click this ready button, will toggle hide these other buttons or reveal them. I usually have all this open. If you go to the Profile tab, and you have a new button here called Open any files location folder. In Windows, you're not really allowed to play around and change files within, for example, program files due to security reasons. So they've moved the any file location outside that and put it somewhere else. This will allow you to quick navigate to it if you need to edit the any file for whatever reason. I know some of the Warthog people with Warthog grips have had to fiddle around with these numbers or the IDs to get things to work right. So maybe that's what that's for. The other major change is in the Axes tab. Now, the axis to button is kind of the same as it ever was here, but it's been expanded. So I'll run through a basic configuration and explain what this does. Axis to button will allow you to set a range. So I'm going to pick a range between 95 and 100%. And I'm going to pick an axis number. I'm going to pick 3, which corresponds to the brake grip lever that's on my CM1 grip. And you can see it moving there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind button 25. So what that means is whenever I move this axis between 95 and 100%, the firmware is going to throw out a button 25 being pressed. And once I move outside that range, the button will be unpressed. If I go to the button tab, you'll see now that it's saying button 25, it's going to be axis Z, and between 95 and 100%, it's going to trigger that. So I will just go and save device. And I just get really paranoid about this and always load the device just after I save it. So now what happens is whenever I grip this first, button 3 is going to trigger because that's the physical button that's wired onto actually pressing the analog lever at all. That goes active. And once I bring it all the way through, there you go. I'm at about 95%. If I release it slightly, it still says active. And there I go. It must be 93 or 94 or less. So that's how that works. It basically allows you to set a range and any particular axis you want to trigger a button press. Now, this is a logical button press. If I actually want to make it do shit, then I need to bind it to a logical button because this is what this little table here is. If you haven't seen my other videos, logical button column is what gets reported to Windows and or your games and shit, right? And the physical button is what's mapped to that. And my button layout's a wee bit different because I've disabled my POV because I don't use POV because I've got track IR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind logical button 24 to physical button 25. Note that if you're messing around in here, this may be ticked. Just untick it because it unticks for everything. I'll just save. Save VPC device. And I'm going to bring up my Windows joystick controller. I'll just put beside that. See it? So I'm going to grip the brake lever and button 19, because that's what it corresponds to over here. There, button 3, physicals, button 19. When I grip it all the way through, bang, button 24 gets bound. So that's the basics of how this mapping shit works. Physical button maps to a button on Windows. Now, the thing about Windows is this tops out at 32, but there's a wee Virpil program you can actually look at the logical buttons up to 28 or some shit like that. 128. So that's the first basic way of doing this, and it's been there for quite a while. There were some requests to expand this, and they have added some new functionality. So what I'm going to do first is set these back to what they were. Go to the button. I'm going to hit clear and then save back to device. Right. So that's the built-in one. That's been there for quite a while. So you have a limited amount of these. So some people are requesting more. I can understand why. For example, in the throttle, the analog A1 or A2 or the other analog slider thing, they could be used to do some cool shit. So I'll just switch over to my throttle here. Now, in the oldie days, I used to click on this and this would happen. It doesn't do that anymore, which is kind of sucky. So just make sure if you're changing between your devices, click the load device profile. I'll just show you why, because if I click on this one and go load, then I go to my buttons. Okay, so there's 23 buttons. And if I click on this and go to button, there's 23 buttons. There is a fuckload more buttons than 23 on my throttle. Click load. And yeah, you see all my buttons now. So just be aware of that if you're in here, man. It could be a pain in the balls otherwise. So let's go and have a wee play with our axes. So here we go. I'm going to pick the RZ axis here. That's the one top right, that one with a big knob on it. It looks kind of like a, I don't know, flaps lever or some shit. So if I double click on it, there's now this new set of controllers. Now these should be actually kind of split up. There should be a divider line here, but they should really put one in at some point. That's a suggestion to you BBC guys if you're listening. So these three are grouped together. So you have 0, 50, and 100%. What I'll do is I'll click save, go back to button, and I'll go and click save again to actually put the profile on the device. Right, so I've moved the slider down to 0. So right now, 68 is active. That's what, the red is. Now, if I move it forward, it goes inactive. So now it's at maybe 10, 15%. I'm going to push her forward. There we go. Oops. Hit 50%. That one goes active, which is corresponding to here, to 68. And all the way forward. And then 70 is triggered. So there's approximately a 2% tolerance. So you got between 48 and 52, and between 98 and 100, and 0 and 2%. So it's quite narrow, but it may be useful for certain things. Now, as I said earlier, you're going to have to bind your physical buttons, these virtual physical buttons, so it's 68, 69, giggity, and 70 to particular actual logical buttons here for Windows to do shit with it, or any game doing with it. So just remember to do that. So that is the method 2 of doing the axes to button. So I'll just double click on that again. Untick these bad boys. And I'll tick these ones. You don't have to tick all these. You can do whichever ones you want. Like I'm just gonna let's do the first one, the middle one, and the end one. Save. You go to button tab and you can see it's now changed it to ranges. So there's actually 2 kind of dead zones in between, you can see here. I'll just save it back to the device. These you can use any analog axes you want on this. Okay, so push it back down to 0. I'll just click reset. So at 0, 68's active. I push it a bit forward. There we go, past 20%. Now none are active. Forward. There we're in the middle zone, which is between 41 and 60, so that button's active. And there we go. We've hit approximately 80 to 100. So that you can use for like dead zones and stuff for whatever the hell you want. And because each of these, I mean, this is based on each axis. So I can go and pedal around with this axis and do whatever I want. So this gives you a far greater degree of flexibility than the first one I showed you, because that first button, or sorry, axis to button thing here only gives you 4 in total for everything. Now you can actually, you could fine tune a couple here if you want to. And if you want to use other ones, then you've got these two sort of band ranges here to play around with. Or you could even mix and match. You could have an absolute here. And that one, let's say that one. Give that back. It's quite clever how they've implemented this. I have to say it is pretty sweet. Put a button. So I'll push it back to 0. So right, so 68's active at 0. Push it forward. Goes inactive. So I'm heading toward 20. And there you go. There's 20%. Go past 40. None are active. And then hit 61 to 80. We've got an active zone again. And then we go past that and we've got nothing. So you can play around in whatever combinations of these you want, whatever makes more sense to whatever role you happen to be using them for. And like I say, you need to fill in this stuff once you've set up your things. This is really neat because it actually shows you which virtual buttons you're going to use. I had some issues before, and it was this. When I was trying to use this, I picked some lowish numbers that weren't actually used. I mean, they didn't correspond to any physical buttons. And it just didn't work. And I couldn't work out why the hell until I contacted Virpil and I said, no, you can't actually use that one. I was like, why? And it's like, oh, we've reserved it because there's something else. So there you go. That's how to do the access to button on the new version of the firmware, which I have to say is pretty fucking sweet. Like, so I hope this helps. The other stuff is pretty well covered in the 11th of April video, how to do all the firmware stuff and do the calibration and shit. You can just watch that and then that'll get you sorted. I'll just save this back and reset my device back. One more thing I'll cover before I close this video out. I would advise once you set a device up in a particular way and calibrate it, you do back the profile up. So if you go to the profile tab, go export profile to file. I am going to put it somewhere useful. So I've got a folder here that's tagged with the firmware revision ID, and I'm just going to save this particular file off. It's my Warbird, and it's the CM1 version of it. I'll give that out. I'll go and select my throttle. Don't forget to click the load button. Back to profile and export. Dropping you back there, that sucks. Call this V1 throttle. Because there's a V1 throttle. Save it off. So if I do, for example, try a new version of firmware like tomorrow or the next day and things go tits up, then I can just load this up, reflash it, firmware back. You can skip to doing the profile. I can just import profile from file and then just save the device, and that's me done, which will save a lot of dicking around. So once you get your devices set up, I do recommend that you export your profile and give it a sort of sensible name and put it somewhere safe just in case something goes wrong.